Welcome back to Justice Redesign. I'm your host, Steve Teskey, retired judge, and this episode continues our ongoing DEI series examining the legal, moral, and institutional backlash against diversity, equity, inclusion, and also, quite frankly, historical truth. And this is part two of Grace for the Oppressor. In part one, we confronted a question that revealed far more than it intended, and that is whether Confederate leaders and enslavers deserve grace because they were supposedly products of their time. And my answer, well, it was direct. They knew, come on. They just chose otherwise. Slavery was not morally ambiguous then. It was defended by some, it was condemned by others, resisted by the enslaved, denounced by abolitionists, and fought over in a war that nearly destroyed this country. The problem, folks, was not ignorance. The problem was power. The problem was self interest. The problem was the willingness to treat human beings as property and then ask history to call that, well, complexity. But part two moves from the past to the present. Because this debate is not only about what people believed in 1861, it is about what we choose to honor now. It is about what we place above school doors. It is about what we ask children to walk beneath every morning. It is about whether naming a public institution after someone who fought to preserve slavery is merely history, or whether it is something far more direct, far more personal, and far more, well, humiliating. And let's be clear from the start. Naming a school is not the same thing as teaching history. Look, a textbook explains, a museum contextualizes, a classroom can examine. But you see, a name honors, a name celebrates, a name tells every child who enters that building whose memory matters enough to be elevated. So, when black children are required to attend schools named after Confederate leaders, that is not neutrality. That is not heritage. That is not a harmless reminder of the past. It is compelled symbolic subordination. It asks children descended from the enslaved to sit beneath the names of men who fought to keep their ancestors in chains and then calls their discomfort oversensitivity. That's not history. It is humiliation. And this is where the war on wokeness becomes so revealing. Because woke has become a slur for awareness. Awareness of harm, awareness of exclusion, awareness of whose pain has been normalized and whose comfort has been protected. But awareness is not the enemy of justice. Awareness is the beginning of it. The danger is not that people are waking up. The danger is that some people are working very hard to put the country back to sleep. So today, we're going to talk about names, memory, Confederate symbols, moral cowardice, and why pretending public honor is the same thing as historical education is one of the most dishonest moves in American civic life. Because some things belong in museums, some things belong in textbooks, some things belong to memory, but not everything that belongs to history deserves a place of honor. And when we confuse remembrance with celebration, we do not preserve history. We rehearse humiliation. So, let's begin. Well, welcome back. Let's talk about naming, because this is where neutrality collapses completely. Naming a school is not documentation, it is honor. Museums explain, as I said before, textbooks contextualize, names celebrate. And forcing black children, American citizens, to attend schools named after men who fought to keep their ancestors in chains is not neutral. It is compelled symbolic subjugation. Now, let's be honest about what America did, okay? This country kidnapped Africans, enslaved them for generations, profited from their labor, then freed them into a society still structured around their exclusion, Jim Crow laws. It was entirely foreseeable that their descendants would still be here. They would become citizens. They would seek dignity and belonging, and they would experience Confederate glorification as ongoing harm. To now say, oh, that's just history, live with it, is not realism. It is civic irresponsibility. Now let's deal with that word woke. We've talked about it before. Wokeness has become a slur because it points to something that's uncomfortable. Awareness. Awareness of harm, awareness of history, awareness of whose pain has been normalized and whose comfort has been protected. Mocking awareness is easier than reckoning with it, but waking up is not radical. It is developmental. Look, folks, Germany does not keep statues of Hitler. It does not name schools after Nazi generals. It does not tell Jewish children to develop thicker skin. It confronted its past and removed symbols of moral atrocity from places of honor. And here's the part Americans need to hear. In Germany, displaying the Nazi swastika is outlawed. Neo-Nazis didn't abandon their ideology. They just adopted different symbols. You know what? One of those symbols is the Confederate flag. Now, that ought to tell you something. When extremists abroad, barred from displaying swastikas, choose the Confederate banner as a stand-in for the swastika, it tells us how the world understands that symbol. They're not looking at it as heritage, not as complexity, but as shorthand for racial hierarchy. Bottom line, racism. That is not an accident. That is recognition. Look, at the bottom, this is not about DEI. It's not about free speech. It's about whether we're willing to say plainly and without apology that slavery was evil, those who defended it were wrong, and honoring them today inflicts real harm on fellow citizens. Refusing to say those things is not neutrality. I'll be frank with you. Refusing to say those things is moral cowardice. Now, before I end, there's something I need to say plainly, because silence here would be another form of dishonesty. One of my great-grandfathers owned a slave. My family still possesses the slave deed. She was 16 years old. The document does not describe her as a person. It describes her like cattle. It inventories her like livestock, right? Listing her teeth, scars, and physical condition in the same way one would catalog cattle. It is cold, a bureaucratic record of dehumanization. And folks, it is real. My family comes from the South, from generations rooted near Richmond, Virginia, the former capital of the Confederacy. This history is not abstract to me. It is not something I learned only from books. It is something I inherited. I get to talk about it, and I make no excuses for it. Southern culture did not excuse slavery then, and it does not excuse silence now. People knew slavery was wrong. They argued about it. They fought over it. They died over it. The claim that enslavers couldn't have known better is not historical humility. It is a moral evasion. It is a lie. I cannot change what my ancestors did, but I can refuse to lie about it. I can refuse to honor it. And I can refuse to demand comfort at the expense of those whose ancestors endured far worse than anything white Americans are being asked to confront today, for God's sakes. That is why I reject Confederate displays. That is why I reject the argument that truth must be softened so white people do not feel ashamed. And that is why I reject the claim, now popular in our politics, that diversity, equity, or historical honesty was wrong because they make some people uncomfortable. Oh, bless their hearts. Discomfort is not oppression, folks. Shame, when earned, is not injustice. And asking descendants of enslaved people to tolerate daily reminders of their ancestors' bondage so others can avoid reckoning is not neutrality, it is cowardice. I come from this history. And precisely because I do, I will not defend it. I will not sanitize it. And I will not pretend that honoring it is harmless. Some things belong in museums. Some things belong in textbooks. And some things belong to memory, but never to celebration. The war on wokeness is not a defense of fairness. It is a defense of forgetting. And forgetting when it humiliates fellow citizens is not innocent. It is a choice. And it is long past time we called it what it is. And for the most part, I'm done, except to deliver this postscript. What we're being asked to extend today is not empathy, but exemption. Not understanding, but absolution. Grace, stripped of responsibility, becomes a shield for power, a way to cleanse injustice without confronting it. And once absolution replaces accountability, the final step is inevitable. History is no longer examined. It is edited. Harm is no longer named. It is minimized. And knowledge itself is severed from perspective. When that happens, society does not merely forget injustice. It relearns it as normal. And that is where the next danger lies. If you teach children dates but not injustice, names but not suffering, wars but not motives, you are not teaching history. You are rehearsing amnesia. And that is the quiet danger we confront next. What happens when knowledge is detached from perspective? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me. Until the next episode, please be safe and take care.